What happened to Charlene and Lisa was remarkable. They'd been abducted, but were found alive.
The abduction of children is very rare, but for two girls to be abducted and to be found and returned home is even rarer.
They don't come back. Kids don't come back when they've been abducted. It's as simple as that. So I was amazed.
They didn't even have a clue that we were there, and he actually turned around and said to him, "Oh, the two missing girls in my front room." And I actually thought, before he said that they couldn't have come in and searched the place. So that's what I was thinking. They could have just taken him and walked away, and we were left there by ourselves. But yeah, he said that, the two girls in the front room, and they had walked in, and the policeman was like, "Hey, we've been looking for you two." And they just picked us up, really, and carried us out. And the minute we stepped out that door, the sunlight, when it hit my face, it was so bright, and the fresh air was great. It really was.
After 3 days and 3 nights away from home, Charlene Lunnon reunited with her parents.
This morning, Keith Lunnon was beginning to fear the worst. Tonight, he and daughter Charlene posed for the pictures that said their family ordeal was over.
I was elated. I was really elated. I couldn't believe that it happened.
It was a freezing Tuesday morning in January 1999 when two 10-year-old best friends, Charlene and Lisa, decided to take a quick shortcut on their 5-minute walk to school. They were just two innocent girls, laughing and sharing secrets, completely unaware that a predator was already hunting on that exact street. In the blink of an eye, a car screeched to a halt, and their ordinary morning shattered into a 4-day nightmare that would grip the entire nation. They vanished without a single trace, swallowed by the quiet suburban streets. It was the last time anyone would see them walking freely. Life hadn't exactly been easy for 10-year-old Charlene Lunnon. Following the sudden, tragic loss of her mother, her whole world was uprooted. She was sent to live with her father, Keith, in the quiet coastal town of Hastings, England. Starting fresh at a new school carried a heavy, lonely weight for a grieving child. But then she met Lisa Hoodless. Lisa was the kind of bright, warm-hearted girl who instantly noticed when someone needed a friend. With the simple, sweet offering of a pencil sharpener on her first day, a beautiful bond was forged. The two quickly became inseparable best friends, sharing secrets and daily laughter. The morning of the 19th of January, 1999, began with that exact same innocent joy. It was a freezing winter day. Bundled up against the bitter cold, the girls said goodbye to their families and set off on their usual, short walk to school. Running just a bit late and craving a tiny taste of independence, they made a seemingly harmless decision to take a quick shortcut down Cornfield Terrace, a quiet, one-way street. It absolutely breaks my heart when I think about how blissfully unaware they were, perfectly shielded in their cheerful childhood bubble. Little did they know, a sinister predator was already hunting in their neighborhood, lurking on that exact street. Charlene later recounted the chilling seconds right before their childhood was stolen from them.
Walking down the road and we were just laughing and joking, and I remember there was loads of rubbish all on the floor, and all the bags had been ripped open, and there was loads of squashed food across the road, and Lisa was about to tread in it, so I pushed her and she slipped into the road, and as she slipped in the road, there was a car driving up and it nearly hit Lisa.
That playful, protective push sent Lisa stumbling off the pavement. Instantly, the terrifying screech of tires shattered the quiet morning air. A car slammed on its brakes, coming to a halt just inches away, plunging them into a nightmare. The tires stopped smoking, and the heavy silence of the cold January morning returned to the quiet street. The man behind the wheel stepped out of the vehicle. His name was Alan Hopkinson, a 46-year-old man who, to the terrified girls, simply looked like an ordinary, startled driver. Seeing the two 10-year-olds trembling on the side of the road, he walked over with a gentle, reassuring expression. He told them how incredibly relieved he was that they were okay. He even wrapped his arms around them in what seemed like a comforting, fatherly hug to calm their nerves. For a split second, Charlene and Lisa thought they were safe. They thought it was just a close call on a freezing morning. But this is where the story takes a dark turn. The warmth of Hopkinson's embrace vanished in an instant, replaced by a vice-like grip that pinned the girls in place. Before they could even process the sudden, terrifying shift in his demeanor, his friendly mask slipped completely. In one swift, forceful motion, he grabbed Lisa, He overpowered the small girl, forced the trunk of his car open, and threw her into the dark, suffocating space. Charlene was left standing on the pavement, completely paralyzed by the sheer horror unfolding in front of her. She watched her best friend get swallowed by the trunk of a stranger's car. What happened next is a detail that completely shatters my heart. In her own words, Charlene later explained her chilling decision.
I just froze. I couldn't talk, I couldn't scream, I couldn't do nothing. But the whole time I was just looking at Lisa, and her face was like bright red and she was screaming. And he just chucked her in, and then, I know it sounds weird, but I sort of just got in myself. I just didn't want to leave her.
But I was screaming.
I gotta be honest with you, I couldn't stop thinking about how a 10-year-old chose to willingly step into unimaginable danger just to protect her best friend. The level of loyalty and bravery in that tiny girl is absolutely staggering. She couldn't bear the thought of Lisa facing that monster alone. So, her tiny hands trembling, she climbed into the trunk. The heavy lid slammed shut, plunging them into pitch blackness. The engine roared, the tires squealed, and in the blink of an eye, Charlene and Lisa vanished from the quiet suburban street without a single trace. While the two terrified girls were being driven toward an unknown nightmare, a catastrophic failure was quietly unfolding. Just a short walk away, the morning school bell rang. Charlene and Lisa's seats sat empty. You would think that two 10-year-olds suddenly going missing would trigger an immediate panic, right? But the school did absolutely nothing. No calls were made to Keith. No alarm bells were raised with Lisa's family. The hours slowly ticked by. It would take a staggering 8 agonizing hours before their parents finally realized their daughters never made it to class. The nightmare was only just beginning. Trapped in the pitch-black trunk, terrified and clinging to each other in the freezing dark, Charlene and Lisa felt the car speed away from everything they knew. Alan Hopkinson drove 12 miles down the coast to the seaside town of Eastbourne. It was a calculated, sinister move designed to put clear distance between himself and the scene of the crime. When the trunk finally popped open, the girls were pulled into a filthy, suffocating apartment. The windows were tightly bolted shut. The door handles had been completely removed from the inside. They were trapped in a real-life nightmare, swallowed by the shadows while the outside world kept turning. Meanwhile, back in Hastings, that agonizing 8-hour delay had finally ended, and absolute chaos ensued. The devastating realization that 2 innocent 10-year-old girls had vanished without a trace triggered one of the most frantic police operations the town had ever seen. Dozens of officers flooded the streets. Sniffer dogs scoured the freezing woods. Helicopters scanned the dark coastline from above, and the local community desperately swept through empty fields. The bright, smiling faces of Charlene and Lisa were plastered across every national television screen and newspaper. The entire country was holding its breath, praying for a miracle. But while a massive manhunt was tearing Hastings apart, the girls were locked away in that squalid Eastbourne flat, enduring a psychological torment that is genuinely hard to stomach. Hopkinson wasn't just keeping them hidden. He was playing a cruel, calculated game with their minds. He turned on the television in the living room and explicitly forced the 2 terrified girls to watch the unfolding news broadcasts. He wanted them to see the massive devastation he had caused. He forced them to sit there and watch their own parents breaking down on national television, weeping and desperately begging an unknown monster to bring their little girls home. For Charlene, watching her father, Keith, crumble on screen was a crushing blow. The man who had fought so hard to give her a stable home was now a shattered shell of himself. Recalling that blood-chilling moment, Charlene later shared,
My dad just looked like he'd given up all hope, and you could just see in his eyes that he thought that we were dead.
The detective leading the search for the missing Sussex schoolgirls, Lisa Hoodless and Charlene Lunnon, has said he's losing hope of ever finding them alive.
Everyone was just giving up hope, everyone was. So where they were giving up hope, me and Lisa just gave up hope. And that was it. We just thought we were never ever going to get found.
Can you even imagine watching your own family grieve for you on TV while you're trapped just miles away? What do you guys make of this twisted mind game? Hopkinson was using their parents' sheer agony as a weapon to break their spirits, telling the girls that they had been abandoned and that he was the only one looking out for them now. But the nightmare was far from over. What this predator had planned for them on the 3rd day would push the boundaries of their survival to the absolute edge. By the time the sun rose on the 3rd day of their captivity, the psychological toll on the two little girls was unimaginable. The squalid Eastbourne flat felt like a shrinking cage, the air heavy with dread and despair. But the nightmare was only just beginning. Out of nowhere, Alan Hopkinson's demeanor abruptly shifted. He grabbed the terrified best friends, hauled them out of the suffocating apartment, and shoved them back into the dark, freezing trunk of his car. As the vehicle rumbled over the uneven roads, the girls clung to each other in the pitch black, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They had no idea where they were being taken, but the drive felt agonizingly long. When the car finally rolled to a stop and the engine cut off, the heavy silence was replaced by a sound that sent ice through their veins, the violent crashing of ocean waves, and the howling of a bitter, coastal wind. Hopkinson yanked the trunk open. As he pulled Charlene and Lisa out into the blinding gray light, the sheer, blood-chilling reality of their location came into focus. He had driven them to Beachy Head. For those who don't know, Beachy Head is a stunning but notoriously tragic chalk cliff on the southern coast of England. It drops a staggering 500 feet straight down into the unforgiving, churning sea below. It is a place heavily associated with final, desperate goodbyes. And now, a towering predator was dragging two innocent 10-year-old girls directly toward the precipice. The frigid wind whipped around them as Hopkinson forced Charlene closer and closer to the jagged edge. He grabbed her tightly by the collar, pushing her small frame so far forward that she could look straight down the dizzying, terrifying 500-foot drop. I gotta be honest with you, putting myself in the shoes of a 10-year-old girl in that exact second makes my stomach physically turn. Charlene later confessed something absolutely devastating about that moment. As she dangled over the abyss, she closed her eyes and completely accepted that she was going to die. But in the midst of that paralyzing terror, she felt a bizarre, quiet sense of relief. She thought that falling to the rocks below would finally, permanently end the horrific nightmare she and Lisa had been enduring for the past 3 days. If you find yourself holding your breath right now, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing light to the incredible resilience of survivors like Charlene and Lisa. Just as Charlene braced her tiny body for the fatal fall, Hopkinson suddenly yanked her backward, ripping her away from the edge. Without a single explanation for this twisted, sinister act of psychological torture, he shoved them back into the trunk and drove them straight back to the filthy apartment. But this near-death experience sparked a desperate, surviving fire inside the girls. Back at the flat, the tension reached an absolute boiling point. The second Hopkinson left them alone in the living room to take a quick shower, the girls sprang into action. Terrified but determined, they frantically dug through the mountains of trash and debris, praying to find something, anything they could use to defend themselves. Instead of a weapon, Charlene's trembling hands unearthed something just as crucial, a piece of mail buried in the mess. It was a letter addressed to Alan Hopkinson, complete with the exact Eastbourne address. For the first time, they knew the name of the monster holding them captive. They knew exactly where they were. But before they could even process this massive breakthrough, the horrific sound of the shower curtain being ripped open echoed through the hall. He was coming out. By the time the morning of January 22 dawned, it marked the fourth agonizing day of captivity. The girls were physically exhausted and emotionally drained, clinging desperately to the faint hope of the address they had memorized the day before. The air in the bolted apartment was suffocating, thick with dread. Then, completely out of the blue, a heavy, authoritative knock shattered the tense silence. Charlene and Lisa instantly froze, their hearts hammering against their ribs. In the hallway, Alan Hopkinson paced back and forth, visibly agitated and swearing under his breath. He made no move to answer the door. The knock echoed again, louder and more insistent this time, followed by a voice that sent a jolt of electricity through the room. "Police!" The girls looked at each other, a mix of pure terror and wild hope washing over them. Would he answer? Would he do something drastic to keep them quiet? Realizing the officer wasn't going to just walk away, Alan finally cracked the door open. Charlene and Lisa huddled together in the living room, absolutely terrified to make a single sound. But this is where the story takes a dark, deeply infuriating twist. That officer standing on the doorstep had absolutely zero clue that the most sought-after children in the entire country were sitting just a few feet away. He wasn't there as part of the massive, frantic manhunt. He wasn't there because of the military personnel, the helicopters, the sniffer dogs, or the national television appeals that had gripped the UK. He was a local officer from Eastbourne, there to follow up on a completely unrelated, routine complaint. Some vigilant parents in the neighborhood had recently reported Hopkinson for acting suspiciously around local children, and the police were simply doing a standard welfare check. A massive national manhunt, and he gets caught because of a routine neighborhood complaint. Does this make your blood boil too, realizing how close they came to slipping through the cracks? The officer casually explained the local complaint and asked Alan to come down to the station for some routine questioning. Alan calmly agreed. He grabbed his wallet and his jacket. He was literally steps away from walking out the front door and locking the girls inside. The officer had no warrant to search the premises. No one would have looked in the living room. No one would have known. But then, in one of the most baffling, phenomenally stupid moments in criminal history, Alan Hopkinson stopped in his tracks. Without being pressured, without an interrogation, and without the officer even suspecting a thing, he just blurted it out. Almost as an afterthought, he casually told the officer, "Oh, by the way, I've got the 2 missing girls from Hastings in my living room." The officer was completely stunned. He immediately pushed past the predator and stepped into the filthy apartment. When he walked into the living room and locked eyes with the 2 missing 10-year-olds, a massive, relieved smile broke across his face. He told them they had been looking everywhere for them. After 4 days of suffocating darkness and relentless psychological terror, the nightmare was finally over. When Charlene and Lisa finally stepped out of that suffocating, bolted apartment, the bright winter sun felt almost blinding. After 4 agonizing days trapped in absolute darkness and relentless psychological terror, they were finally breathing fresh air. The drive back to Hastings was a blur of flashing police lights and overwhelming, tearful relief. Waiting for them at the station were their frantic, emotionally shattered families. Charlene later recalled the exact moment she saw her father. Keith was never known to be an overly emotional or physically affectionate man, but the second Charlene stepped out of the police cruiser, he sprinted toward her. He grabbed his little girl and wrapped his arms around her in a desperate, bone-crushing hug. He simply couldn't let go. For a brief, beautiful moment, the tears flowing across the nation were tears of pure joy. The girls had survived the unsurvivable. But while the families celebrated their miracle, forensic investigators were tearing apart Alan Hopkinson's Eastbourne flat, and what they uncovered was absolutely blood-chilling. This wasn't just a random, spur-of-the-moment crime. Hidden inside his filthy apartment, police found notebooks filled with specific class details, lists of children's names, and meticulously drawn maps of local schools and escape routes. Hopkinson was a highly organized, calculating predator who had been actively stalking the innocent. And then, the story takes a dark turn that will completely shatter your faith in the authorities. As the media dug into Hopkinson's background, an explosive, deeply infuriating secret was revealed to the public. The police didn't just catch a random monster, they caught a monster the justice system already knew perfectly well. Hopkinson had a heavily documented criminal history of kidnapping and harming young girls. He was a known, convicted predator who had already served time for stealing another child's innocence. But the horrifying truth is, Alan Hopkinson had been sitting in a prison cell the very same morning he abducted Charlene and Lisa. He had been officially released from custody less than 4 hours before he drove his car down Cornfield Terrace. Let that sink in. The justice system unlocked its doors, handed a highly dangerous, repeat offender his freedom, and allowed him to walk right back into a suburban community filled with vulnerable kids. There was no adequate monitoring, no immediate warning sent to the local police force, and absolutely no protection for the children walking to school that day. He literally used his first few hours of freedom to immediately hunt again. I gotta be honest with you, this part really makes my blood boil when you realize how entirely preventable this tragedy was. These 2 10-year-old girls were forced to endure an unimaginable, 4-day nightmare, not just because a predator decided to strike, but because the very system designed to protect them completely and catastrophically failed. The girls did nothing wrong, yet they paid the price for a monumental institutional mistake. When the public found out that Hopkinson had just walked out of prison, the overwhelming relief of the rescue quickly morphed into white-hot rage. The entire nation was no longer just celebrating. They were furiously demanding answers, setting the stage for a dramatic, absolute fight for justice.
Fantastic. I was cuddling on my mum and dad and having a little chat, and
Can you lift the mic?
then I had a nice hot shower.
The two girls have now been given a week off, but did they miss school?
Yeah, and all my friends and my boyfriend.
Yeah.
What's your boyfriend's name?
Stevie.
What did you miss the most?
My dad moaning at me.
The public outrage following the revelation of the system's failure was deafening, but thankfully, the courts finally stepped up to permanently correct their catastrophic mistake. In May 1999, Alan Hopkinson stood in a hushed courtroom to face the absolute weight of the terrifying nightmare he had unleashed on two innocent children. There would be no leniency, no loopholes, and no second chances this time. The judge slammed the gavel down with absolute finality, handing the predator a staggering 9 life sentences. It was the ultimate, undeniable confirmation that this monster would never, ever walk freely through a quiet suburban neighborhood again. He would take his very last breath behind thick steel bars, permanently stripped of his power to inflict pain on another family. For Keith, and for the entire town of Hastings, it was a massive exhale of relief. But as we all know, locking away the villain doesn't magically erase the devastating psychological scars left behind. The road to recovery for Charlene and Lisa was not a Hollywood ending where everything was instantly okay. The heavy, complicated trauma of those 4 suffocating days in captivity actually fractured their once beautiful friendship. For years throughout their early teens, the two survivors drifted far apart, silently carrying the massive weight of their shared nightmares separately. It felt as though the kidnapper had managed to steal not just their childhood innocence, but the very bond that had given them the courage to survive in the pitch-black trunk of his car. However, the story of these two incredible girls is one of absolute, undeniable triumph. When they were 16 years old, the tragic passing of a mutual friend brought them back into each other's orbits. They finally sat down, broke their silence, and talked through the unimaginable pain they had both endured. In that profoundly emotional conversation, they completely mended their fractured relationship. From that day forward, their friendship was resurrected, stronger and more unbreakable than ever before. They eventually wrote a book together, bravely reclaiming their narrative and refusing to be labeled merely as victims of a terrible crime. What truly amazes me, and what really brings this story full circle, is the phenomenal woman Charlene has become today. She is now a mother, raising her own beautiful children with a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. She knows the true darkness of the world firsthand, but she refuses to let it dictate her family's joy. In an awe-inspiring display of mental fortitude, Charlene has publicly stated that she doesn't give Alan Hopkinson a single second of her time. She even refused to write a victim impact statement for his parole hearings because she absolutely refuses to let him occupy even an inch of space in her mind. He is nothing to her now. Even more incredibly, she admitted she wouldn't change the past. She wouldn't take back that freezing January morning, because surviving that hellish ordeal forged her into the absolute warrior she is today. She took the worst imaginable terror a 10-year-old could face and used it to build an indestructible armor. Finally, after years of pain, justice was served and they took their lives back. What do you guys think? Does this incredible resilience bring you a sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching and for all the comments you guys make this worth it.